All right, let's get right into it. We usually think of the law as something that happens in a courtroom, right? With judges and lawyers and all that formal stuff. But the truth is, it's this invisible force that shapes almost every single part of our daily lives. So today, we're going to pull back the curtain on Canada's legal system and see how it really works. Just think about your day so far. Seriously, from the minute you woke up, how many different laws do you think have already touched your life? I'm willing to bet the answer is way, way more than you'd expect. And that's exactly what we're going to dig into. And these examples, they get right to the heart of it. Renting an apartment? Yep, the Residential Tenancies Act is setting the rules there. Trying to get disability benefits or dealing with a workplace injury? You bet there are specific legal frameworks for that. Starting a business? Oh boy, that means you're dealing with everything from bankruptcy law to the Income Tax Act. Even just watching a news report about a trial touches on core legal ideas like the burden of proof. See? The law is absolutely everywhere.
So to make sense of all this, here's our plan. We'll start with the very foundations of Canada's unique legal system. Then we'll get personal and look at your rights. After that, we'll see how the law shapes our economy, how we settle disputes, and finally, how this entire system is constantly, and I mean constantly, changing.
Okay, first up, Canada's legal foundations. Think of this as the blueprint for the whole system. Before we can get into the nitty-gritty, we really have to understand the big picture, the core principles that everything else is built on top of.
Now here's what's so fascinating about Canada's setup. It's what's called pluralist, which is just a fancy way of saying it has more than one legal tradition. For most of the country, we use the common law system. We got that from England, and it's where judges' decisions create precedents that guide future cases. But in Quebec, it's different. They use a system based on French civil law, which relies on this big, comprehensive legal code. And this isn't just some historical fun fact. It has real-world impact on everything from how you write a contract to how property is passed down, all depending on where you are in the country.
And sitting at the very top of this entire structure, the boss of all laws, is the Constitution of Canada. It is the supreme law of the land, which means no other law is allowed to contradict it. This, of course, includes the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which spells out the fundamental rights that belong to every single one of us.
So how do these big foundational ideas actually show up in our daily lives? Well, that brings us right to our next section, your rights and protections. This is where we connect all those abstract principles to your everyday experience.
Here is a perfect, down-to-earth example. Let's say you're a renter in Ontario. According to the Residential Tenancies Act, your landlord can't just pop in whenever they feel like it. Nope. They have to give you 24 hours written notice before coming in for something like a repair. That's not just them being polite, it's a legally enforceable right that protects your privacy.
Of course, those rights extend into much more serious areas too. So let's shift gears from something like tenancy to the criminal justice system. This is what a lot of us think of when we hear about our rights, and for good reason. The rules here are incredibly strict, especially when it comes to things like evidence. And a key piece of that is often the testimony from an eyewitness.
And that leads us to one of the most powerful concepts in all of criminal law, the burden of proof. In Canada, you are innocent until proven guilty, period. That means it's the Crown's job, the state's job, to prove someone is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. That is a very high bar to clear, and it applies to the whole case, not just one little piece of evidence.
All right, on to our next section, law and the economy. Because beyond our personal rights, the law provides the essential rulebook that allows our entire economy to function. It regulates everything from a tiny startup to massive nationwide industries.
A really great modern example of this is environmental law. Let's take carbon pricing. At its core, it's a legal tool designed to lower greenhouse gas emissions by, well, putting a price on them. And it applies right across the economy, hitting large industrial plants, the fuel you put in your car, and a whole lot more. It's a crystal clear case of the law being used to steer economic activity.
And the scope of these laws is just massive. I mean, this table here barely scratches the surface. Businesses have to navigate bankruptcy laws if they get into financial trouble, income tax laws that are always being updated, environmental rules that dictate what they can and can't do, and even rules about how information has to be shared in a legal case. It's a complex world out there.
So what happens when things go wrong? When a landlord and tenant can't agree, or an employee has a problem with their boss. That takes us to how we actually resolve disputes. And let's demystify the places where a lot of these critical decisions get made.
You see, many disputes aren't settled in a regular courtroom.
They're handled in what's called an administrative tribunal. Just think of these as specialized bodies that focus on one particular area of law. So whether it's the Employment Standards Tribunal in BC for workplace issues or Ontario's Landlord and Tenant Board for rental fights, they provide a special place to resolve these specific types of conflicts. And the process, while it might sound intimidating, is actually pretty straightforward. It kicks off with an introduction where the person in charge explains the rules. Then, each side gets to present their evidence and call witnesses. After that, the other side gets to question those witnesses. That's called cross-examination. And finally, both parties make their closing arguments to try and convince the decision-maker they're right.
And that brings us to our final section, an evolving legal landscape. This is so important. We have to understand that the law is not some dusty old book that never changes. It's a living, breathing system that has to adapt to new technologies, shifting social values, and brand new global challenges.
And this right here, this might be the single most important takeaway. Because our world is always changing. The law has to change with it. The legal system we have today is not going to be the same one we have 50 years from now. It can't be.
And here's a perfect example of that evolution in action. This quote comes from Canada's Arctic foreign policy. It shows how our laws are having to adapt to new geopolitical realities. As new threats pop up in really sensitive areas like the Arctic, Canada's legal and diplomatic tools have to evolve to protect our interests and work with other countries.
Which leaves us with a final thought to chew on. From things like artificial intelligence and data privacy, to climate change and global security, brand new challenges are popping up all the time. So the big question for all of us is this: what do we want the laws of tomorrow to protect? And how will our legal system keep adapting to get us there?